Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a genuinely bizarre corner of history, a place where the pursuit of beauty took a terrifyingly toxic turn. Imagine a world not so long ago where women willingly ingested arsenic wafers, tiny, seemingly innocuous pills, all in the name of achieving a coveted complexion. Picture a delicate Victorian lady, perhaps just like one from a faded photograph, meticulously unwrapping a wafer, believing it would grant her radiant skin and sparkling eyes, completely oblivious to the slow, insidious decay it was wreaking within her. It's a chilling thought, isn't it, that the quest for an ephemeral ideal of beauty could lead someone to embrace a known poison. You probably won't survive this story without a shiver down your spine and a newfound appreciation for modern skincare. This isn't some obscure, isolated incident, but a widespread, albeit clandestine, fad that swept through parts of Europe and America in the 19th century. We're talking about arsenic, the very same substance used in rat poison and infamous for its role in countless murders throughout history, being marketed and consumed as a beauty aid. It sounds like something out of a gothic horror novel, doesn't it? But it was a grim reality, a testament to the lengths people would go to conform to societal pressures. Historians still argue whether the consumption of arsenic for beauty was a true widespread phenomenon or exaggerated by moral panic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And if you're enjoying these historical deep dives, remember to like and follow the channel to ensure you don't miss our next adventure. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself transported to a dimly lit dressing room in the late 1800s. The air is thick with the scent of lavender and face powder, but if you listen closely, perhaps you can detect a faint, metallic tang. You see a woman, her hand trembling slightly as she lifts a small, flat wafer to her lips. She isn't a villain in a melodrama, nor is she suicidal. She is simply a product of her time, a woman desperate to achieve a specific aesthetic ideal. She believes this wafer is her secret weapon, a shortcut to the porcelain skin and bright eyes that society demands. It's truly baffling, isn't it? Like trying to whiten your teeth with a hammer? Effective, perhaps, but with rather unfortunate side effects. This bizarre beauty fad wasn't just about vanity. It was deeply intertwined with the social anxieties and scientific misunderstandings of the era. The lines between medicine, quackery, and poison were incredibly blurred, especially when it came to substances like arsenic, which had legitimate, albeit dangerous, medicinal uses at the time. This fuzzy boundary allowed unscrupulous individuals to market deadly compounds as harmless beauty enhancers, preying on the hopes and insecurities of their clientele. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the most alluring promises can hide the most dangerous truths. You're still in that late 19th century dressing room, feeling the palpable pressure that shaped a woman's life. And it's impossible to understand the appeal of arsenic wafers without grasping the absolute dominance of the Victorian era's allure for a specific kind of beauty. This wasn't just about looking nice. It was about embodying a fragile, ethereal ideal that bordered on the morbid. The most coveted look was a ghostly pale complexion, almost translucent, suggesting a delicate constitution, a life of leisure, and an almost otherworldly purity. Imagine a woman striving for skin so fair it seemed untouched by sunlight, free from the robust glow of outdoor labor. Dark circles under the eyes, far from being a sign of fatigue, were often seen as romantically melancholic, contributing to the consumptive chic that glorified illness. And those large, languid eyes, they were enhanced with belladonna, another deadly poison also known as deadly nightshade, which dilated the pupils, giving a wide-eyed, dreamy, almost feverish gaze. It was a look that screamed, "I'm too delicate for this world. Please protect me and bring me smelling salts." This isn't just a beauty standard. It's a social statement, a visual cue that you belong to the upper echelons of society. This obsession with pallor was deeply rooted in the social dynamics of the time. A sun-kissed tan signified a life spent toiling outdoors, a clear marker of the working class. Therefore, a pristine, almost luminous paleness became a powerful symbol of wealth and gentility, distinguishing the idle rich from the laboring poor. Women would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid the sun, carrying parasol, wearing wide-brimmed hats, and, ironically, consuming substances that would slowly kill them. It's like buying a fancy car just to drive it into a ditch because everyone else is doing it. Pure, unadulterated madness, driven by societal pressure. Beyond the skin, there was also a fascination with a slender, almost gaunt figure, often achieved through restrictive corsetry that literally reshaped the body, sometimes with devastating internal consequences. The whole aesthetic pointed towards a fragile, almost non-physical existence, a stark contrast to the burgeoning industrial world outside. This ideal, relentlessly promoted in fashion magazines and popular culture, created immense pressure on women to conform, regardless of the personal cost. Historians still argue whether this specific beauty ideal was primarily a patriarchal construct designed to emphasize female fragility, or if women actively embraced it as a symbol of elite status. You see women meticulously applying layers of rice powder and bismuth to their faces, but those were merely superficial measures. For those seeking a deeper, more profound pallor, a purifying effect from within, the promise of arsenic wafers must have seemed like a miraculous solution. They offered a way to achieve that coveted luminescence, not just by covering up, but by altering the body's very chemistry. It was a dangerous shortcut, a desperate gamble for social acceptance and perceived beauty, born from an era's bizarre and often deadly aesthetic demands. You're still grappling with the Victorian era's strange beauty ideals, and now it's time to confront the central, terrifying ingredient in this beauty fad weedy. Arsenic, a familiar foe. Even in the 19th century, arsenic was widely known for its lethal properties. It was a common ingredient in rat poison, insecticides, and even certain pigments. Its use in murders was well documented, earning it the grim moniker the king of poisons due to its effectiveness and the difficulty in detecting it post-mortem. Yet, despite this widespread knowledge of its toxicity, it was simultaneously believed to possess paradoxical medicinal and cosmetic benefits in small, controlled doses. Imagine the cognitive dissonance required. You know this substance can kill, but you're told that in minute quantities, it can cleanse, purify, and beautify. This belief stemmed from centuries of folk medicine and observation, often without proper scientific understanding. For instance, tiny amounts of arsenic were used in some legitimate medical treatments for conditions like syphilis, malaria, and skin diseases. This medicinal application, however dangerous, lent a veneer of credibility to its use in beauty products. It's like being told that a tiny drop of gasoline can make your car sparkly clean, even though you know a larger amount will make it explode. You'd probably still be a little hesitant, right? The specific form of arsenic used was often arsenic trioxide, a white, odorless, and tasteless powder when pure, which made it incredibly easy to conceal in food, drink, or, in this case, a wafer. This lack of immediate sensory warning meant that users wouldn't know they were ingesting something dangerous until the insidious effects began to manifest. This stealth allowed the beauty fad to spread, as initial doses might not immediately cause alarm. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of arsenic for complexion were merely a placebo effect, or if the initial physiological responses genuinely created a temporary, superficial glow before the deeper damage set in. You see how the very qualities that made arsenic a deadly weapon also made it a deceptive beauty aid. Its ability to constrict blood vessels, for instance, could temporarily reduce redness and create that coveted pale, almost translucent complexion. Users might experience an initial brightening of the skin, a superficial clarity that they mistakenly attributed to arsenic's beneficial properties. This initial deceptive glow would encourage continued use, trapping individuals in a perilous cycle. Furthermore, the general lack of stringent pharmaceutical regulation meant that unscrupulous manufacturers could easily incorporate dangerous substances into their patent medicines and beauty products without fear of immediate repercussion. There were no ingredient lists as you know them today, no government oversight to test for safety. Consumers were largely at the mercy of advertising and anecdotal evidence. This regulatory void allowed arsenic, the familiar foe, to masquerade as a benevolent beauty elixir, exploiting both scientific ignorance and societal vanity. It's the ultimate trust exercise, where the prize is potentially looking pretty, and the penalty is a slow, agonizing demise. You're still on this unsettling journey into the bizarre world of 19th century beauty, and just when you thought arsenic was enough to contend with, we need to talk about what the strychnine connection. Koi, believe it or not, some of these seemingly harmless arsenic wafers or complexion pills weren't content with just one deadly ingredient. They often included strychnine, another notoriously toxic substance, known for its use as a pesticide and, of course, a rapidly acting poison in murder cases. Imagine the absolute audacity, or perhaps the sheer ignorance, of manufacturers who would combine two such potent killers into a product marketed for delicate complexions. Strychnine, derived from the strychnos nux vomica tree, causes severe muscular convulsions, spasms, and ultimately, death by asphyxiation, often within minutes or hours of ingestion. Its inclusion, even in minute quantities, was purportedly to give the user bright, sparkling eyes by stimulating the optic nerve and dilating the pupils. A similar effect to belladonna, but with far greater and more immediate risk. It's like being promised a healthy organic smoothie, only to find out it contains a dash of drain cleaner and a sprinkle of rat poison. Refreshing, the combination of arsenic and strychnine created a cocktail of dangers. While arsenic worked slowly, insidiously destroying internal organs, strychnine offered a more immediate, though often subtle, physiological kick. Users might initially feel a heightened sense of alertness or a perceived brightening of their vision, mistaking these early neurological effects for the promised benefits. This fleeting sensation would only reinforce their belief in the product's efficacy, lulling them further into a false sense of security. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of strychnine was due to a genuine, albeit misguided belief in its cosmetic effects, or purely to create a more immediate, noticeable buzz to hook users. You can almost picture the unsuspecting woman swallowing a wafer, perhaps noting a slight metallic aftertaste from the arsenic, and then feeling a subtle jolt, a quickening of her pulse from the strychnine. She might even think, "Ah, it's working." The cruel irony, of course, is that these initial sensations were merely the body's frantic struggle against the poisons being introduced into its system. It was a chemical illusion, a deadly magic trick performed inside one's own body. The inclusion of strychnine highlights the utter recklessness and profound lack of understanding that characterized the patent medicine industry of the era. Manufacturers were often driven by profit, with little regard for public safety or long-term health. They preyed on desperation and vanity, exploiting the scientific illiteracy of the general public. The idea that such potent substances could be safely dosed for cosmetic effect was a dangerous delusion, one that claimed countless lives and irrevocably damaged many more. It's a sobering reminder that natural ingredients can be just as deadly, if not more so, than synthetic ones. You're still in that unsettling 19th century scene, perhaps now holding one of these infamous items in your mind's eye. The true cunning and danger of this fad lay in the very form of the poison wafers, a deceptive delicacy. These weren't crude powders or harsh liquids, but often small, thin, palatable tablets, designed to be easily swallowed and to look utterly innocuous. The very presentation disguised their lethal nature, making them seem as harmless as a sweetmeat or a breath mint. Imagine a manufacturer carefully pressing a tiny amount of arsenic and perhaps strychnine into a wafer, perhaps flavored with sugar or a mild extract. They might even be colored, tinted pink or white to appear even more appealing, like a child's candy. This seemingly innocent form was a deliberate psychological trick. It normalized the act of ingesting a dangerous substance, making it part of a daily beauty ritual rather than a terrifying act of self-poisoning. You wouldn't think twice about popping a small lozenge for a sore throat, would you? This was exactly the kind of casual acceptance manufacturers sought to cultivate. It's like being offered a piece of delicious chocolate, but the chocolate is actually a tiny, sweet hand grenade. The packaging is just so misleading. The term wafer itself carries connotations of lightness and harmlessness. Think of communion wafers or thin biscuits. This linguistic camouflage was crucial in bypassing the consumer's natural caution. It suggested a delicate, easily digestible form, far removed from the harsh, corrosive image of raw arsenic powder. This made it easier for people to rationalize their dangerous choice, convincing themselves that such a small, pleasant-looking item couldn't possibly contain anything truly harmful, especially when marketed by seemingly reputable companies. Historians still argue whether the patent medicine manufacturers genuinely believed in the safety of microdosing arsenic, or if their claims were solely driven by profit motives and a cynical disregard for public health. You can almost feel the smooth, dry texture of the wafer on your tongue, perhaps a faint sweetness, followed by that subtle metallic tang you now know indicates trouble. The fact that these wafers bypass the immediate gag reflex or a strong warning taste was fundamental to their dangerous success. They slid down easily, their deadly work beginning imperceptibly within the body. This silent entry allowed the poison to accumulate, to slowly erode health without an immediate, dramatic warning that might send the user running for a doctor. This deceptive delicacy was a masterclass in dangerous marketing, playing on both societal vanity and a profound lack of consumer protection. It underscores the stark reality of an era where what you consumed, especially if it promised a quick fix, could literally be a matter of life and death, hidden behind a thin, appealing facade. The arsenic wafer, in its benign form, was a potent symbol of the era's medical quackery and the desperate pursuit of an idealized, yet ultimately fatal, beauty. You're still contemplating the deceptively innocent arsenic wafer, but to truly grasp why anyone would willingly consume such a thing, you need to understand its unsettling historical roots, specifically the Appalachian precedent. This bizarre beauty fad didn't emerge from nowhere. It was in part inspired by a long-standing peculiar practice in the Styrian Alps, a region of Austria and Slovenia, where arsenic eating, often by men, had been observed and documented for centuries. Imagine isolated mountain communities, their inhabitants living hardy, often strenuous lives. For generations, some Styrian peasants, known as arsenic eaters or arsenic fresser, had a strange, ritualized practice of ingesting small, gradually increasing doses of arsenic. Their initial motivation wasn't beauty, but rather a belief that it enhanced their stamina, improved their breathing when climbing steep mountain paths, and even gave them a robust, healthy appearance, a ruddy complexion, rather than the pale look sought by Victorians. It was their secret energy drink, but with a far more permanent kick. You'd probably prefer a nice cup of coffee, wouldn't you? This practice, though confined to a specific region, wasn't entirely unknown to the wider scientific and medical community. Accounts from travelers, doctors, and scientists who visited Styria in the 19th century documented this phenomenon, often with a mixture of fascination and horror. These reports, sometimes sensationalized, described individuals who appeared robust and healthy despite consuming quantities of arsenic that would be lethal to an unacclimated person. This perceived immunity and the apparent health benefits were often attributed to the body's ability to adapt to the poison, a dangerous misinterpretation of the true physiological effects. Historians still argue whether the accounts of Styrian arsenic eaters were exaggerated by early toxicologists for dramatic effect, or if the practice was genuinely as widespread as reported. You can almost picture a Styrian farmer, red-cheeked and seemingly hale, popping a tiny pebble of arsenic after a hard day's work, truly believing it made him stronger. It's important to remember that this was often a generational practice, passed down, with individuals starting with minuscule doses and very slowly building up their tolerance, or rather, their ability to survive larger doses. This acclimation was a dangerous tightrope walk, as even a slight miscalculation could prove fatal. The key was a precise, slow increase in dosage, which made these individuals incredibly difficult to treat if they ever needed medical help for arsenic poisoning, as their bodies reacted differently. The reports from Styria, despite their inherent dangers, provided a perverse kind of evidence for the more widespread use of arsenic. If mountain peasants could use it for stamina and a healthy glow, surely refined ladies could use it for a pale, ethereal beauty. This seemingly credible precedent, albeit misapplied and misunderstood, played a significant role in fueling the arsenic wafer fad. It offered a historical and quasi-scientific justification for a truly perilous beauty regimen, convincing consumers that small doses of poison could indeed be beneficial. It's a classic case of taking a bizarre local custom and attempting to globalize it, with tragically predictable results. You're still delving into the deceptive origins of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you peel back another layer, you uncover its dangerous association with Fowler's solution, a legitimate yet highly toxic medicinal compound of the era. This connection lent a veneer of scientific credibility to the idea of ingesting arsenic, dangerously blurring the lines between controlled medical treatment and reckless self-medication for beauty. Imagine a Victorian physician prescribing a patient a few drops of a clear, pale liquid known as Fowler's solution. This solution, developed by Dr. Thomas Fowler in the late 18th century, contained potassium arsenite, a compound of arsenic, and was widely used to treat a variety of ailments, including fevers, skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema, and even as a tonic. It was a powerful drug, and its use was based on the then prevailing medical understanding, where arsenic was believed to have certain therapeutic properties, particularly as an anti-malarial and a general systemic stimulant. It was the ancient equivalent of a multi-purpose cleaner. But instead of cleaning your house, it was cleaning your insides with potentially fatal side effects. You'd probably think twice about using that for a quick wipe down, wouldn't you? The crucial distinction, which was often lost in the craze for beauty, was that Fowler's solution was a carefully formulated pharmaceutical intended for precise, physician-supervised dosages. Doctors would start with extremely small quantities and gradually increase them, closely monitoring the patient for signs of toxicity. The problem arose when the general public, observing its use for skin conditions or general toning, mistakenly believed that if a little was good, more might be better, or that they could safely self-administer it for purely cosmetic purposes. Historians still argue whether the medical community did enough to warn the public about the extreme dangers of self-medicating with arsenic, given its widespread availability in various forms. You see advertisements for arsenic wafers subtly hinting at their medicinal purity or physician-approved qualities, leveraging the reputation of legitimate, albeit dangerous, arsenic-based compounds like Fowler's solution. This clever marketing tapped into the public's trust in medicine, even as it delivered a product that was essentially unregulated poison. The general public often lacked the scientific literacy to distinguish between a precisely formulated pharmaceutical administered under medical supervision and a mass-produced, unregulated beauty pill. It's like confusing a carefully prescribed chemotherapy drug with a generic vitamin. Both are pills, but only one is going to, not kill you when taken incorrectly. The perceived success of Fowler's solution in clearing up skin conditions, even temporarily for medicinal purposes, fueled the mistaken belief that arsenic could magically purify the complexion from within. This idea, combined with the desire for the fashionable pale look, created a potent, tragic synergy. women weren't just taking a chance on an unknown substance. They were, in their minds, applying a known medical remedy to their beauty woes, oblivious to the critical differences in dosage, supervision, and ultimate intent. The legacy of Fowler's solution, therefore, is a complex one, a testament to early pharmacological attempts, but also a dangerous enabler of a truly bizarre and deadly beauty fad. You're still in the shadows of the 19th century, witnessing this alarming beauty fad, and it becomes starkly clear that the driving force behind women willingly consuming arsenic was the overwhelming pressure of the war-desperate women's quest. This wasn't merely about vanity, it was deeply rooted in societal expectations, the limited avenues for female agency, and the profound importance placed on a woman's appearance as her primary currency in a restrictive world. Imagine a young woman, perhaps nearing the age where marriage was expected, keenly aware that her prospects, her very future, could hinge on her perceived beauty. A clear, pale complexion, large, luminous eyes, and a delicate appearance were not just aesthetic preferences. They were often seen as indicators of health, purity, and social standing, making a woman desirable for marriage or acceptance into polite society. For many, and failing to meet these ideals could mean a life of spinsterhood, social marginalization, or limited opportunities. It's like being told your entire career depends on whether you can juggle flaming torches while reciting Shakespeare. You'd probably try a few questionable shortcuts, wouldn't you? Especially if everyone else seemed to be succeeding. This pressure was particularly acute for women of the middle and upper classes, who were largely confined to the domestic sphere and whose social value was often tied to their physical presentation. Unlike men, who could pursue careers and build wealth, a woman's power and influence often came indirectly, through a successful marriage or by maintaining a respectable social standing. Appearance, therefore, became a critical tool in navigating this restrictive landscape. Historians still argue whether the desperate pursuit of beauty was a form of female empowerment in a limited sphere, or simply another symptom of patriarchal oppression. You see women poring over fashion magazines, admiring illustrations of idealized beauties, then looking at their own reflections with a critical, disheartened gaze. The advertisements for arsenic wafers promised a quick, easy solution to their perceived flaws, preying on these deep-seated insecurities. They weren't just selling a product, they were selling hope, the promise of acceptance, and a shortcut to achieving the unattainable ideal. The desperation was real, born from a system that often valued a woman's external appearance above all else. For some, the quest might have even been fueled by internal anxieties or a desire to escape perceived physical imperfections that caused them distress. In an era without widespread therapy or self-acceptance movements, cosmetic cures offered a seemingly tangible path to alleviating personal unhappiness. The allure of a quick fix, especially one so widely if deceptively promoted, was a powerful motivator, overriding common sense and even the clear warnings that eventually emerge. It's a tragic testament to the immense societal pressure that could drive individuals to embrace methods that were, quite literally, self-destructive, all in the misguided belief that it would lead to a better life. You're still witnessing the strange allure of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you explore it further, you see how its sinister appeal was amplified by the persuasive, yet utterly dishonest, power of advertisements' false promises. In an era before stringent consumer protection laws and truth in advertising regulations, manufacturers of patent medicines and beauty products operated with alarming freedom, peddling their wares with exaggerated claims and outright deception. Imagine flipping through a popular Victorian magazine or newspaper. Interspersed among articles and social commentary, you'd find elaborate, often beautifully illustrated advertisements for Dr. So-and-so's complexion wafers or Madame X's peerless pills for purity of the skin. These ads didn't just market a product, they wove a compelling narrative. They promised a cure for sallowness, blemishes, dullness, and impurities of the blood, all common anxieties of the time. They painted vivid pictures of newfound radiance, social acceptance, and even increased marital prospects, directly tapping into the desperate women's quest for beauty. It's like seeing an ad for a miracle diet pill that promises you'll look like a supermodel by next Tuesday. And it's endorsed by a doctor who coincidentally looks suspiciously like a magician. You'd probably be a bit skeptical now, but back then, it was gospel. The language used in these advertisements was deliberately vague yet enticing. They wouldn't explicitly state contains arsenic, of course. Instead, they'd use euphemisms like potent purifying agents, blood cleansers, or cellular revitalizers. They might even include testimonials from seemingly satisfied customers, often fabricated or exaggerated, describing miraculous transformations. These personal endorsements were incredibly powerful, creating a sense of trust and social proof, especially among those eager for a quick fix. Historians still argue whether the patent medicine industry's marketing strategies were merely a reflection of the era's gullibility or a sophisticated exploitation of scientific ignorance and desperate hopes. You might see an advertisement featuring a before and after illustration on one side, a pale, sickly-looking woman with dull eyes. On the other, the same woman transformed, radiant, with sparkling eyes and a luminous complexion. The transformation promised was not just physical, but social. It implied that beauty, achieved through these wafers, would unlock a world of opportunities and happiness. This visual rhetoric was incredibly effective, preying on the insecurities of a populace with limited access to accurate medical information. Furthermore, these ads often played on the prevailing belief in tonics and blood purifiers, common concepts in 19th century self-care. Arsenic, in small doses, was sometimes believed to have a stimulating effect on the metabolism, which could temporarily make users feel more energetic or appear more lively before the deeper toxicity set in. This fleeting, perceived benefit was then cleverly exploited by advertisers as evidence of their product's efficacy, reinforcing the false promises. The sheer volume and pervasiveness of these advertisements meant that it was nearly impossible to escape their influence, creating a societal acceptance of what was, in reality, a deadly gamble. You're still observing the Victorian lady in her dressing room, perhaps having just ingested an arsenic wafer, and for a short, deceptive period, she experiences what she perceives as the symptoms of early use that are actually beneficial. This initial cruel illusion was key to the fad's dangerous longevity, convincing users they were on the right path before the true horror set in. Imagine her looking in the mirror, perhaps a few days or weeks after beginning her regimen. She notices her complexion seems clearer, perhaps even a bit paler, with a delicate, almost a porcelain-like quality. The slight puffiness around her eyes, a common concern, might have diminished, making her eyes appear larger and more sparkling. These initial, superficial improvements were often genuine, though temporary, physiological responses to the poison. Arsenic, in very small doses, can affect capillary permeability and blood flow, temporarily reducing redness and inflammation, creating that desired ethereal pallor. It's like when you're driving on fumes, and the empty light somehow makes you feel like you've got more gas than you actually do. It's a temporary confidence boost before the inevitable breakdown. Beyond the skin, some users reported a feeling of increased energy or a general sense of invigoration. This effect, though dangerous, could be attributed to arsenic's stimulating effect on certain metabolic processes or even the slight neurotoxic effects of any strychnine present, which, in tiny doses, can act as a stimulant before becoming a violent convulsant. These fleeting sensations were easily misinterpreted as a sign of improved health and vitality, reinforcing the false promise of the beauty wafers. Historians still argue whether the physiological effects of microdosed arsenic provided genuine, albeit temporary, cosmetic benefits, or if these were purely psychological, driven by the placebo effect and the power of suggestion. You might see her confidently attending a social gathering, receiving compliments on her radiant appearance. Each compliment, each envious glance, would reinforce her dangerous belief in the wafer's efficacy. This positive feedback loop was incredibly powerful, overriding any nascent doubts or minor discomforts she might experience. The immediate, visible results far outweighed the abstract, unproven warnings about long-term danger. For a woman desperate to meet a demanding beauty standard, these early symptoms felt like a miracle. The tragic irony, of course, is that these early benefits were merely the initial stages of a slow, insidious poisoning. The arsenic was accumulating in her system, beginning its quiet work of damaging internal organs and disrupting cellular processes. The temporary pallor would eventually give way to a sickly, unnatural whiteness, the sparkling eyes to a dull, fixed stare, and the feeling of energy to profound fatigue. But in these early days, bathed in the deceptive glow of perceived success, the user was deeply committed to her dangerous beauty secret, unaware that she was slowly, methodically, poisoning herself in the pursuit of an impossible ideal. You're still observing the Victorian woman, perhaps months into her arsenic wafer regimen, and the initial one, deceptive glow, is beginning to dim. Now, the true insidious work of the poison is underway, particularly the heavy toll on the liver's burden. Arsenic, once ingested, doesn't just pass through, it accumulates in the body, and the liver, being the body's primary detoxification organ, bears the brunt of its devastating effects. Imagine the liver, a vital, complex organ, silently struggling against the constant influx of poison. Arsenic damages liver cells, impairing their ability to filter toxins, produce essential proteins, and metabolize fats. This cellular damage leads to inflammation, enlargement, and eventually the scarring known as cirrhosis. The initial symptoms might be subtle, a vague sense of malaise, a slight nausea after meals, or a dull ache in the abdomen. These could easily be dismissed as minor ailments, perhaps biliousness or simply a delicate constitution, further masking the true, deadly cause. It's like trying to run a marathon with a lead weight tied to your ankle. You might start strong, but eventually, something's going to give, and it won't be pretty. As the liver's function deteriorates, the body's ability to process and eliminate other toxins also diminishes, leading to a buildup of waste products. This can contribute to the sickly, yellowish-white pallor that eventually replaces the initial radiant complexion. As the body struggles to maintain its internal balance, the skin becomes thin, almost papery, and the eyes, once sparkling, might develop a yellowish tinge due to jaundice, a clear sign of liver distress. This transformation is a cruel reversal of the promised beauty, turning the user into a living testament to arsenic's destructive power. Historians still argue whether the medical understanding of chronic arsenic poisoning, particularly its impact on internal organs like the liver, was sufficiently advanced at the time to accurately diagnose and prevent widespread harm. You see the woman, once so confident in her beauty regimen, now appearing increasingly frail. Her appetite might wane, her energy levels plummet. She might experience unexplained weight loss, despite consuming what seems like adequate food. These are all signs of a body struggling under immense internal duress, its vital organs slowly failing. The poison isn't just affecting her skin, it's systematically dismantling her from the inside out, piece by agonizing piece. The insidious nature of arsenic poisoning meant that symptoms often progress slowly, making it difficult for both the victim and their physician to connect the dots to the beauty wafers. The damage was cumulative, often reaching irreversible stages before it was properly identified. By the time severe liver dysfunction became evident, the body was already profoundly compromised, leaving little hope for recovery. The liver, so crucial for life, became a silent battleground, ultimately overwhelmed by the continuous, self-inflicted assault of the very substance meant to bring beauty. It's a grim reminder that some beauty secrets are best left unshared, especially if they involve organ failure. You're still observing the slow, agonizing decline of the arsenic wafer user, and the superficial benefits she once experienced have now given way to the horrifying reality of skin deep, death deeper. The very complexion she so desperately sought to enhance is now betraying her, mirroring the insidious destruction occurring within her body. Imagine the porcelain pallor, once admired, now transforming into a sickly, almost waxy white, sometimes with a faint yellowish or grayish tinge due to internal organ damage. The skin becomes dry, flaky, and prone to lesions and eruptions that refuse to heal. Ulcers and persistent rashes can appear, particularly in areas prone to pressure or friction. This isn't just a minor cosmetic imperfection, it's a visible manifestation of systemic poisoning, where the body's largest organ, the skin, is literally crying for help. It's like trying to paint over rust on a car. Eventually, the rust eats through, and no amount of paint will hide the decay. Beyond the complexion, the nails become brittle, discolored, and often develop characteristic white bands, known as Mises lines, a grim telltale sign of chronic arsenic exposure. The hair, paradoxically, often becomes dry and brittle, leading to significant thinning or even complete loss. A cruel irony for a product marketed for beauty. You can almost see her running her fingers through thinning strands, a flicker of despair in her eyes as the promised radiance turns into a living nightmare. This wasn't just about looking less beautiful. It was about appearing diseased, even repulsive, a stark contrast to the alluring advertisements. Historians still argue whether the characteristic skin lesions and discolorations associated with chronic arsenic poisoning were widely recognized by Victorian physicians, or often misdiagnosed as other skin ailments. The deep, systemic damage extends far beyond the skin. Arsenic impacts virtually every organ system. We've already touched on the liver, but the kidneys, heart, and nervous system are also under relentless assault. The constant strain on these vital organs leads to chronic fatigue, weakness, and a general feeling of profound unwellness. The user might experience persistent headaches, dizziness, and a dull ache throughout her body, symptoms that she might dismiss as a persistent cold or simply the natural frailties of life. Unaware they are silent alarms from a body under siege. The slow, progressive nature of the poisoning meant that the victim might not immediately connect her worsening health to the beauty wafers. The decline was gradual, allowing her to normalize her deteriorating condition until the accumulated damage became irreversible. This made intervention incredibly difficult, as by the time the severity of the symptoms became undeniable, the poison had often wrought irreparable harm. It's a terrifying testament to the power of self-deception and the lengths to which individuals would go, fueled by societal pressure, to maintain a dangerous beauty ideal, literally sacrificing their health and life for a fleeting and ultimately false promise of perfection. You're still observing the Victorian user of arsenic wafers, and a particularly cruel irony of this beauty fad now becomes painfully apparent. The very product meant to enhance her appearance actually led to hair loss and thinning. For a woman in an era where long, voluminous hair was a crowning glory, this side effect would have been devastating, a visible betrayal of the product's false promises. Imagine her meticulously brushing her hair, only to find increasing clumps caught in the bristles, strands falling out with alarming regularity. Her once thick, lustrous locks might become dull, brittle, and significantly thinner, revealing more of her scalp. This isn't just a minor cosmetic issue. For a Victorian woman, hair was deeply intertwined with femininity, status, and desirability. The gradual loss of it would have been a profound psychological blow, undermining the very confidence the wafers were supposed to build. It's like buying a miracle diet shake that makes you lose weight, but also, surprisingly, all your teeth, definitely not in the brochure. Arsenic, when absorbed into the body, interferes with the metabolic processes of rapidly dividing cells, including those in hair follicles. This disruption leads to weakened hair shafts, premature shedding, and a reduced capacity for new hair growth. The paradox is particularly cruel. A substance ingested for aesthetic improvement directly undermines another key component of the era's beauty ideal. This devastating side effect would often develop gradually, making it harder for the user to connect it directly to the wafers, especially if advertisements cleverly attributed hair loss to other factors like nervous strain or general debility. Historians still argue whether Victorian women were fully aware of the paradoxical effects of arsenic on hair, or if the advertising effectively masked these unpleasant truths until it was too late. You might see her attempting to hide the thinning with elaborate hairstyles, carefully positioned bonnets, or even early forms of hairpieces, desperately clinging to the illusion of health and beauty. The shame and embarrassment would have been immense, a secret burden carried alongside the growing internal suffering. This visible deterioration would often be dismissed by the user as unrelated, perhaps due to stress or other common ailments of the era, rather than acknowledging the toxic regimen she was voluntarily undergoing. The tragedy here is multi-layered. Not only was the woman poisoning herself, but the very markers of beauty she sought were being systematically dismantled. The pristine complexion would become sickly, and the desired voluminous hair would thin and fall out, leaving her with the very opposite of what was promised. This profound disillusionment, coupled with the escalating physical symptoms, would eventually reveal the horrific cost of her desperate quest. The arsenic wafer, initially a symbol of hope and transformation, would ultimately become a monument to vanity's cruelest trick, taking not just her health, but her very sense of self. You're still observing the Victorian user of arsenic wafers, and as her body struggles under the insidious attack, one of the most immediate and agonizing forms of suffering manifests as gastrointestinal distress. This wasn't just a slight tummy ache, it was a relentless assault on the digestive system, a clear and undeniable sign that something was gravely wrong, yet often dismissed as commonplace ailments of the era. Imagine her waking each morning with persistent nausea, a metallic taste lingering in her mouth, and a burning sensation in her stomach. Throughout the day, she might experience severe abdominal cramps, often accompanied by bouts of vomiting and diarrhea. This isn't the fleeting discomfort of a bad meal. This is the constant, grinding agony of an irritated and inflamed digestive tract, struggling to cope with the steady intake of poison. It's like having a tiny, angry badger living in your stomach, constantly clawing and gnawing. Not exactly conducive to a feeling of radiant beauty, is it? Arsenic is a potent irritant to the mucous membranes of the digestive system. Even in small doses, chronic exposure causes inflammation of the stomach and intestines, leading to the severe symptoms observed. The vomiting, initially, might be seen as a cleansing or purifying effect, perhaps even a sign that the blood cleanser was working, expelling impurities from the body. The diarrhea might be attributed to a change in diet or a common bowel complaint. These misinterpretations allowed the user to continue her dangerous regimen, delaying crucial intervention. Historians still argue whether Victorian physicians, lacking precise diagnostic tools, often misdiagnosed chronic arsenic poisoning as common digestive disorders like dyspepsia or cholera morbus, thereby overlooking the true cause. You can almost feel her desperate attempts to hide her suffering. At social gatherings, she might politely refuse rich foods, claiming a delicate stomach or nervous indigestion. At home, she might retreat to her room frequently, enduring agonizing spasms in private. The constant battle against nausea and the need to discreetly manage bouts of vomiting or diarrhea would have been an immense physical and emotional drain, further isolating her. The very beauty she sought was now forcing her into a life of secretive suffering. The prolonged gastrointestinal distress would also lead to significant weight loss, not the desirable kind of slender figure, but a gaunt, sickly emaciation that bespoke illness rather than elegance. The body, constantly purging, losing vital fluids and nutrients, would weaken rapidly. This relentless internal assault left the user physically depleted, unable to fully absorb nourishment, and increasingly vulnerable to other infections. The stomach, once a simple receptacle for sustenance, became a battlefield where every meal, every wafer, added to the relentless, agonizing fight for survival. You're still observing the slow, agonizing decline of the arsenic wafer user, and the internal damage is now extending beyond the visible and tangible. The poison is insidiously attacking the very command center of her being, leading to neurological decay, Sunam, this is where the true horror of chronic arsenic poisoning becomes chillingly apparent as it impacts the nervous system, leading to a spectrum of debilitating and often irreversible symptoms. Imagine her experiencing a persistent tingling or numbness in her fingers and toes, a sensation often dismissed as pins and needles or poor circulation. This is peripheral neuropathy, caused by arsenic damaging the nerve endings furthest from the brain. As the poisoning progresses, this tingling can turn into excruciating pain, a burning sensation, or even a complete loss of sensation, leaving her unable to feel touch or temperature properly. It's like her body is slowly losing connection with itself, piece by piece, like a faulty electrical wire fraying until the current can no longer pass through. You'd probably start questioning your beauty regimen at this point, wouldn't you? Beyond the peripheral nerves, arsenic also affects the central nervous system. Users might experience chronic headaches, dizziness, and a general feeling of mental fogginess or confusion. Concentration becomes difficult, memory falters, and decision-making becomes impaired. This cognitive decline, often subtle at first, would gradually erode her intellectual sharpness, leaving her feeling disoriented and increasingly withdrawn. This is particularly tragic, as the woman who sought beauty was losing her very faculties, becoming a shadow of her former self. Historians still argue whether the subtle neurological symptoms of arsenic poisoning were often attributed to hysteria or nervous complaints in Victorian women, rather than recognizing their toxic origin. You might see her struggling with coordination, perhaps stumbling occasionally, or fumbling with small objects. Her muscles might feel weak, leading to general fatigue and difficulty performing everyday tasks. In severe cases, muscle wasting and paralysis could set in, leaving her confined to a chair or bed, utterly dependent on others. The sparkle in her eyes, once a desired effect, would be replaced by a dull, fixed stare, and her once delicate movements would become slow, deliberate, or even tremulous. The insidious nature of neurological decay meant that it often progressed unnoticed for long periods, as symptoms were vague and easily attributed to other causes. By the time the neurological damage became severe and undeniable, it was often irreversible. The nerves, once damaged, have a limited capacity to heal, leaving the victim with permanent disabilities even if the arsenic exposure ceased. The beauty wafer, taken to enhance life, was instead slowly, meticulously, dismantling the very essence of it, turning a vibrant individual into a person afflicted by a progressive, paralyzing decay. You're still observing the Victorian user of arsenic wafers, and as her body succumbs to the poison's slow assault, an even more terrifying mechanism takes hold. Addiction's deadly grip. Pin. This wasn't merely a physical dependency in the modern sense, but a complex interplay of the body's adaptation to the toxin and the user's profound psychological reliance on a product they believed was enhancing their life, forcing them into a horrifying cycle of increased dosage. Imagine the woman, perhaps feeling the familiar aches of withdrawal if she tries to skip a wafer, or noticing her skin losing its perceived glow after missing a dose. Her body, accustomed to the presence of arsenic, begins to crave it, or rather, to react negatively in its absence. This physiological tolerance or acclimation meant that the initial small doses that once produced superficial effects now seem less potent. To maintain the desired pale complexion or the fleeting sense of vitality, she would inevitably increase her intake. It's like being hooked on a video game, but the game is slowly destroying your vital organs, and the only way to keep playing is to increase the difficulty until it becomes literally impossible to win. This phenomenon was observed in the Styrian arsenic eaters we discussed earlier. They too gradually increase their doses over time. The body develops a peculiar, dangerous ability to tolerate increasing amounts of arsenic, but this tolerance doesn't mean the poison isn't doing damage. It merely means the immediate or acute symptoms are less severe, allowing the user to ingest more. This created a deadly feedback loop. The body needs more to achieve the same perceived effect, leading to higher doses, which in turn cause greater long-term harm. Historians still argue whether the addictive nature of arsenic was truly understood by medical professionals in the 19th century, or if it was dismissed as mere habit or patient noncompliance. You see her secretly measuring out a slightly larger piece of a wafer, or perhaps adding an extra wafer to her daily regimen. There's a subtle desperation in her movements, a silent acknowledgement that she is now beholden to this tiny, dangerous ritual. She might rationalize it, telling herself that her body is simply stronger now and can handle more, or that the original dose was simply too weak. This self-deception, fueled by vanity and the perceived benefits, kept her locked in the spiraling descent. The psychological dependency was equally powerful. For a woman deeply invested in her appearance, the fear of losing her hard-won and dangerously achieved beauty was immense. The wafers became her crutch, her secret weapon against aging and perceived imperfections. The thought of stopping and potentially losing her radiance would have been terrifying, far outweighing the vague, unproven warnings about future health problems. This combination of physical acclimation and psychological reliance made arsenic wafers incredibly difficult to abandon, even as their destructive effects became increasingly undeniable. It was a tragic testament to how easily hope can transform into a deadly obsession. You're still observing the insidious spread of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you do, you can't ignore the complicity of quack doctors' role. These unscrupulous medical practitioners, operating on the fringes of legitimate medicine, played a pivotal part in popularizing and profiting from dangerous patent remedies, including arsenic-based beauty products. They lent a deceptive air of authority to products that were, in reality, little more than poison. Imagine a bustling Victorian city street, lined with storefronts. Among them, you'd find the offices of these doctors, often self-proclaimed, with dubious qualifications. If any, their waiting rooms would be filled with hopeful patients, desperate for cures for everything from consumption to unsightly blemishes. These quacks understood the public's anxieties and vulnerabilities, particularly those of women seeking beauty and relief from various ailments. They marketed themselves as purveyors of secret knowledge, offering miracle cures that legitimate physicians often dismissed as snake oil. It's like going to a doctor who promises to cure all your ills with a magic crystal and a series of interpretive dances. You'd probably question their medical license, wouldn't you? These quack doctors often endorsed and directly sold arsenic wafers, sometimes under their own brand names, lending their medical expertise to the product's claims. They would publish glowing testimonials, often fabricated, and make grand pronouncements about the wafer's ability to purify the blood, brighten the complexion, and restore vitality. They leveraged the public's trust in medical authority, even if that authority was entirely self-appointed. This was a direct betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath, turning the pursuit of health into a deadly commercial enterprise. Historians still argue whether the widespread influence of quack doctors was due to a genuine lack of access to legitimate medical care, or a societal preference for quick, sensational cures over conventional, often slower treatments. You see a woman, perhaps convinced by a persuasive advertisement or a friend's recommendation, sitting across from one of these quacks. He might perform a quick, superficial examination, then, with an air of profound wisdom, prescribe the arsenic wafers, assuring her of their complete safety and efficacy. He wouldn't mention the long-term side effects, the liver damage, or the neurological decay. His focus was on the immediate sale, the quick profit. Any subsequent health decline would be attributed to other factors, or the patient simply discontinuing the cure too soon. The lack of rigorous medical licensing and oversight allowed these charlatans to flourish. They could operate largely unchecked, preying on an unsuspecting public eager for solutions to their health and beauty concerns. Their role was critical in normalizing the consumption of arsenic for cosmetic purposes, convincing a generation of women that a deadly poison was, in fact, a path to radiant beauty. The quack doctor, therefore, wasn't just a seller of dangerous goods. He was an enabler of self-destruction, a figure who blurred the lines between healing and harm for personal gain. His legacy is a stark reminder of the perils of unregulated medical claims and the enduring power of deception. You're still witnessing the dark side of 19th century self-care, and to fully comprehend the rise of arsenic wafers, you must understand a critical dynamic of the era. The pharmaceutical shift. This period marked a crucial transition in medicine, where traditional apothecaries and physician-prepared remedies began to compete with a burgeoning industry of mass-produced, often unregulated, patent medicines. This shift created a dangerous void, allowing poisonous substances to be marketed directly to the public without proper oversight. Imagine the traditional apothecary, a local chemist meticulously grinding herbs and compounding prescriptions under the watchful eye of a trained professional. This was the conventional way medicine was dispensed, with a direct relationship between the physician, the pharmacist, and the patient. But as the 19th century progressed, driven by industrialization and new printing technologies, a new player emerged: the large-scale pharmaceutical manufacturer. These companies began producing patent medicines, often secret formulas, trademarked and marketed directly to consumers through extensive advertising, bypassing the traditional medical establishment entirely. It's like going from your trusted neighborhood tailor who makes custom suits to buying off-the-rack clothes from a massive factory that doesn't really care if they fit or, you know, contain asbestos. This shift meant that legitimate medicine, with its cautious, doctor-supervised use of powerful substances like arsenic in specific preparations like Fowler's solution, was increasingly overshadowed by a deluge of unregulated products making extravagant claims. The patent medicine industry capitalized on a public eager for quick fixes and disillusioned with the often ineffective or harsh treatments of conventional medicine. They presented their products as accessible, affordable, and miraculously effective, often using pseudoscientific language to baffle and impress. Historians still argue whether the medical establishment was too slow to adapt to this pharmaceutical shift, thereby allowing dangerous products to proliferate unchecked. You see vibrant, colorful advertisements for cure-alls and tonics plastered everywhere, from newspapers to billboards. These products, often containing undisclosed amounts of potent ingredients like opium, alcohol, and yes, arsenic, were sold directly off the shelves of general stores, drugstores, and even by mail order. There was no requirement to list ingredients, no pre-market safety testing, and no regulatory body to pull dangerous products from circulation. This legal vacuum was a goldmine for unscrupulous manufacturers and a death trap for unsuspecting consumers. The pharmaceutical shift essentially created a free-for-all, where profit trumped public health. Arsenic wafers were just one example of the countless dangerous concoctions that flourished in this unregulated environment. Consumers were left to navigate a treacherous landscape of false promises, armed only with hope and the misleading rhetoric of advertisements. This era stands as a stark reminder of the critical importance of modern drug regulation and consumer protection laws, which were largely non-existent during the time of the arsenic beauty fad. The legacy of this shift is a profound lesson in the perils of commercial interests overriding public safety, a lesson etched in the tragic fates of those who sought beauty in a deadly pill. You're still observing the tragic consequences of the arsenic wafer fad, and as victims began to exhibit severe symptoms, physicians faced an immense challenge: detection, a medical challenge. So, in the 19th century, diagnosing chronic arsenic poisoning was incredibly difficult, often leading to misdiagnoses and delayed interventions, allowing the poison to inflict irreversible damage. Imagine a doctor called to the bedside of a patient suffering from a cluster of vague yet debilitating symptoms: persistent nausea, unexplained fatigue, skin lesions, and nerve pain. These symptoms, individually, could be attributed to a myriad of common ailments of the era: dyspepsia, rheumatism, various fevers, or even nerves or hysteria, particularly in women. There was no specific test for arsenic in a living patient's blood or urine that was readily available or routinely performed in a general practice. The physician had to rely heavily on observation, a detailed patient history if the patient was willing to disclose their secret beauty regimen and ruling out other conditions. It's like trying to find a specific, tiny, invisible needle in a haystack made entirely of other invisible needles. And you're blindfolded. Not exactly an easy diagnostic process. The insidious nature of chronic arsenic poisoning, where symptoms develop gradually over months or even years, further complicated detection. Unlike acute poisoning, which causes rapid and dramatic collapse, the slow accumulation of arsenic mimicked the progression of chronic diseases. This meant that by the time the symptoms became severe enough to alarm a physician, the poison had often already wrought irreparable harm to vital organs and the nervous system. Historians still argue whether the medical community of the 19th century possessed sufficient knowledge of the long-term, cumulative effects of chronic arsenic exposure to connect it reliably to vague, non-specific symptoms. You might see the doctor scratching his head, perplexed by a patient whose condition doesn't neatly fit into a known disease category. He might try various tonics or traditional remedies, none of which would address the root cause, leading to further frustration for both patient and physician. The patient, perhaps out of embarrassment or fear of judgment for using a secret beauty product, might also be reluctant to disclose their use of arsenic wafers, further hindering an accurate diagnosis. This lack of transparency between patient and doctor was a significant barrier to detection. The only definitive way to confirm arsenic poisoning in many cases was post-mortem, through rudimentary toxicological analysis of tissues, particularly hair and nails, where arsenic tended to accumulate. However, by this point, it was too late for the victim. This grim reality underscores the immense medical challenge of the era. Arsenic was a master of disguise, and the tools to unmask it were simply not yet developed or widely accessible. The countless unrecorded deaths and illnesses from arsenic wafers stand as a testament to the limitations of 19th century medical science in the face of such a cunning and deadly poison. You're still surveying the grim landscape of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you delve deeper, a glaring absence becomes painfully obvious: the pervasive lack of regulation. In the 19th century, consumer protection laws were virtually non-existent, leaving the public vulnerable to the unchecked avarice of manufacturers who prioritize profit over public safety, allowing dangerous beauty products to flood the market. Imagine a world where anyone could mix almost any substance, package it attractively, give it a compelling name, and sell it with wild, unsubstantiated claims. There were no government agencies like the FDA or EPA, no mandatory ingredient lists, no pre-market testing requirements, and no legal penalties for selling a product that slowly killed its users. This was the Wild West of pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, a free-for-all where the concept of consumer safety was largely unheard of. It's like buying a parachute from a street vendor who promises it's extra fluffy and guaranteed to make you fly, with absolutely no way to check if it's actually just a bag of rags. You'd probably think twice before jumping, wouldn't you? Manufacturers of arsenic wafers and other dangerous patent medicines exploited this regulatory void with ruthless efficiency. They could openly advertise their products, often using misleading or outright false claims, without fear of legal challenge. The burden of proof for harm lay entirely with the consumer, who, even if they suspected foul play, faced insurmountable challenges in proving causation due to the slow, insidious nature of the poisoning and the lack of forensic capabilities. Historians still argue whether the slow pace of implementing drug regulations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was primarily due to industry lobbying or a genuine philosophical debate about individual liberty versus state intervention. You see vibrant newspaper advertisements boldly proclaiming the miraculous effects of these wafers, often alongside equally dubious products promising cures for everything from baldness to consumption. There was no public health body to issue warnings or mandate recalls. If a product caused widespread illness or death, it was often only through the tireless efforts of a few dedicated physicians, scientists, or journalists that the truth eventually came to light, often too late for many victims. This reliance on individual crusaders, rather than systemic oversight, meant that dangerous products could remain on the market for years, continuing their silent destruction. The lack of regulation wasn't just about beauty products. It was a systemic issue that affected all sorts of consumer goods. Food adulteration was rampant. Medicines were often ineffective or harmful, and industrial safety standards were minimal. The arsenic wafer fad was merely one egregious example of the broader problem of an unregulated marketplace. It highlights a period where the individual bore almost all the risk, and corporations operated with near-complete impunity. The bitter irony is that the very freedom that allowed for innovation also facilitated the widespread sale of poisons for profit. You're still observing the unsettling landscape of the arsenic wafer fad, but now a glimmer of resistance begins to emerge. Public outcry and warnings. As the devastating effects of these beauty aids became increasingly apparent, a few courageous individuals, often medical professionals, scientists, or determined journalists, began to raise their voices, attempting to expose the dangers and protect an unsuspecting public. Imagine a physician, having treated multiple patients presenting with similar, perplexing symptoms, skin lesions, neurological issues, and inexplicable fatigue, all of whom admitted to secretly taking arsenic wafers. Frustrated by the lack of official action and alarmed by the mounting evidence, he decides to publish his findings in a medical journal, detailing the horrific side effects he's observed. This wasn't a casual act, it was a professional risk, as it challenged the powerful and profitable patent medicine industry. It's like being the first person to yell iceberg on the Titanic. Everyone might be too busy dancing to listen, and the ship is already moving fast. These early warnings often took the form of articles in medical journals, public lectures, or even exposés in more progressive newspapers and magazines. They aimed to educate the public about the true nature of arsenic poisoning, linking the vague symptoms to the seemingly harmless wafers. They would highlight specific cases of severe illness and death, attempting to counteract the pervasive and often deceptive advertising. This was a battle for public perception, a fight against ingrained vanity and powerful commercial interests. Historians still argue whether the initial impact of these warnings was limited by widespread illiteracy and the immense power of advertising, or if they genuinely began to shift public opinion. You might see a determined journalist poring over medical reports and interviewing distraught families, piecing together a horrifying narrative of silent suffering. Her articles, published under sensational headlines, would describe in vivid detail the physical deterioration of arsenic users, revealing the cruel irony of a product that promised beauty but delivered disfigurement and death. These were the muckrakers of their day, shining a harsh light into the dark corners of unregulated commerce. However, these early warnings faced immense challenges. The patent medicine industry had vast financial resources to counter negative publicity, often dismissing critics as alarmists or unscientific. Public trust in advertising was high, and the desire for quick, easy beauty solutions was powerful. Furthermore, yes, many users of arsenic wafers kept their habits secret, making it difficult to collect comprehensive data on the true scale of the problem. Despite these obstacles, the persistent efforts of these concerned individuals gradually chipped away at the facade of safety, laying the groundwork for future regulatory reform. The public outcry was less a sudden roar and more a growing chorus of concerned voices, slowly building towards an undeniable truth. You're still observing the slow unveiling of the arsenic wafer's true horror. And now, the abstract warnings begin to take on faces and names through our sensational case studies. While many victims suffered in silent anonymity, some tragic instances of arsenic poisoning garnered enough public attention to become infamous, serving as stark, undeniable evidence of the fad's deadly consequences. These cases, often detailed in medical journals or sensationalized by the press, acted as grim cautionary tales. Imagine reading a newspaper report about a young society woman, once admired for her delicate complexion, now a shell of her former self, her skin discolored, her hair thinning, her movements tremulous. The article would meticulously detail her decline, recounting how she secretly consumed complexion pills for years, oblivious to their arsenic content. Such narratives, often presented with dramatic flair, aim to shock the public into recognizing the real dangers lurking in seemingly innocent beauty products. It's like discovering that your favorite celebrity's flawless skin was achieved by rubbing toxic waste on their face. The glamour quickly fades, replaced by sheer horror. One of the most widely cited examples, though often generalized, came from the medical community's observations of chronic arsenic poisoning. Physicians would meticulously document patients presenting with the classic symptoms, the peculiar skin lesions, hyperkeratosis and hyperpigmentation, the Mies lines on the nails, and the peripheral neuropathy leading to weakness and pain. While not always tied to beauty wafers specifically, these documented medical cases provided irrefutable scientific proof of arsenic's devastating long-term effects, lending weight to the warnings against its ingestion. Historians still argue whether the anonymity of patients in early medical reports hampered the public's ability to connect generalized warnings to their own dangerous habits. You might encounter a court case, perhaps an attempted murder where the poison was traced back to arsenic, inadvertently shedding light on how easily the substance could be acquired and ingested, or a physician's detailed account of a patient who finally confessed to their secret habit of arsenic eating, allowing the doctor to accurately diagnose and document the poisoning. These were the moments when the invisible danger became horrifyingly tangible. These sensational cases often acted as crucial turning points, forcing a public, accustomed to dismissing vague warnings, to confront the grim reality. These case studies, whether reported in scientific literature or sensationalized in the popular press, played a vital role in dismantling the deceptive image of arsenic as a beauty aid. They provided concrete examples of human suffering and death directly linked to the consumption of these wafers, making it impossible for even the most ardent proponents to deny the danger. They were the undeniable proof, the chilling "I told you so" from the scientific community to a society enamored with dangerous quick fixes. The faces of these victims, even if only described in print, became the haunting embodiment of beauty's deadly cost. You're still observing the aftermath of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you reflect on the chaos and tragic losses, you see how these harrowing experiences inadvertently laid crucial groundwork for the future. Poison controls dawn. The widespread harm caused by unregulated substances like arsenic wafers, coupled with other dangerous patent medicines and adulterated foods, slowly but surely spurred a growing public demand for governmental oversight and scientific expertise in managing toxic exposures. Imagine a group of frustrated physicians and public health advocates, tired of seeing patients die from easily preventable poisonings, realizing that merely issuing warnings wasn't enough. They began to lobby for systematic changes, for laws requiring ingredient labeling, for government agencies to test products, and for specialized centers where medical professionals could quickly identify and treat poisonings. This wasn't a sudden, revolutionary leap. It was a gradual, incremental push, born from the tragic lessons learned from fads like arsenic wafers. It's like trying to build a fire department after your entire neighborhood has burned down twice. A bit late, maybe, but absolutely essential for the future. While formal poison control centers, as you know them today, wouldn't fully emerge until the mid-20th century, the arsenic wafer crisis, along with other similar public health disasters of the 19th and early 20th centuries, created the imperative for such institutions. The sheer difficulty in diagnosing and treating these poisonings highlighted the need for specialized knowledge and rapid access to information about toxins. The recognition that individual doctors couldn't possibly keep up with the myriad of dangerous substances on the market underscored the need for centralized expertise. Historians still argue whether the push for poison control was primarily driven by medical breakthroughs in toxicology or by public outrage over specific high-profile poisoning incidents. You see the slow evolution of a collective response, early efforts by academic institutions to compile lists of known poisons and their effects, the beginnings of systematic data collection on poisoning incidents, and the eventual lobbying for legislative action. These were the nascent stages of what would become a sophisticated network of experts and resources dedicated to preventing and managing toxic exposures. The sheer scale of the harm from products like arsenic wafers provided undeniable evidence that voluntary compliance and individual caution were insufficient. The arsenic wafer fad served as a stark, living example of what happens in the absence of regulation and a centralized approach to poison management. It illustrated the tragic consequences when consumers are left to fend for themselves against powerful, unscrupulous industries. Thus, the very deaths and disfigurements caused by this bizarre beauty craze became catalysts for reform, pushing society towards a more proactive and scientifically informed approach to public health and safety. The victims, in their suffering, unknowingly contributed to a system that would one day protect future generations from similar dangers. You're still observing the complex societal impact of the arsenic wafer fad, and it becomes clear that its reach, while widespread, was often shaped by the social class divide, access to information, discretionary income, and the prevailing beauty standards meant that the allure and danger of these deadly wafers varied significantly across different strata of Victorian society. Imagine a wealthy lady with ample leisure time and a disposable income, able to purchase the most expensive, elegantly packaged arsenic wafers, perhaps even delivered discreetly to her home. Her motivation would be to maintain a delicate, unblemished complexion that outwardly signaled her elevated status, a look that literally proclaimed she did not toil in the sun. For her, it was a secret weapon in the endless social competition, a dangerous shortcut to an ideal that defined her class. She might consult with a fashionable, albeit unscrupulous, chemist or even a self-proclaimed beauty doctor who would subtly encourage her habit, reinforcing her belief in its efficacy. It's like buying designer clothes that turn out to be made of poison ivy. Only the rich can afford the really dangerous stuff. Contrast this with a working-class woman. Her primary concern would likely be survival, not a translucent complexion. While she might still desire beauty, her limited funds and lack of leisure meant she was less likely to be the primary target market for these often pricey, advertised beauty cures. If she did encounter arsenic, it might be in a much cruder form, perhaps as a household pest control, and accidental poisoning would be a greater risk than intentional cosmetic use. The very nature of her labor, often outdoors or in factories, would make achieving the aristocratic pale ideal practically impossible anyway. Historians still argue whether the patent medicine industry specifically targeted middle and upper-class women, or if their pervasive advertising simply reached everyone with differential access to purchase. You see how deceptive advertising played a role across classes. But the specific type of deception might have differed. While high-end ads promised refined purity, cheaper versions might simply tout miracle cures for any skin ailment, often sold in general stores rather than apothecaries. Lower-income individuals were, however, still vulnerable to a vast array of dangerous patent medicines that contained other harmful substances like opium or excessive alcohol, often marketed as cheap remedies for common ailments, further blurring the lines of safety across the social spectrum. The social class divide also influenced access to medical care. A wealthy woman might have her personal physician, who, even if initially perplexed, might eventually identify the poisoning, though often too late. A poorer individual might rely on charity clinics or less experienced practitioners, making accurate diagnosis even more unlikely. This disparity in medical access meant that the unsung victims of arsenic wafers were disproportionately likely to be those without the resources to seek adequate medical attention or demand accountability. So, as you reflect on the arsenic wafer fad, remember that while beauty ideals pervaded society, the specific dangers and vulnerabilities associated with this particular obsession were often shaped by social class divide. It was a tragic testament to how societal pressures and economic disparities could push individuals into different, yet equally perilous, relationships with the deadly substances of their time. You're still observing the lingering shadows of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you reflect on its true human cost, it becomes painfully clear that the vast majority of those impacted remain forever hidden. The unseen victims. While historical accounts might occasionally mention a high-profile case, the countless individuals who suffered illness, disfigurement, or death from these beauty products, often in obscurity, leave no formal record. Their stories lost to the annals of history. Imagine a young seamstress, working long hours, her skin dulled by poor diet and lack of fresh air. She buys a cheap packet of complexion pills advertised in a local newspaper, hoping to catch the eye of a suitor. Months later, she develops chronic fatigue. Her hands begin to tingle, and her hair thins. She attributes it to her arduous work or a persistent cold, gradually growing weaker until she succumbs to what her family believes is consumption or a sudden fever. Her death certificate, if one exists, would list a vague natural cause, completely missing the insidious poison she unwittingly consumed. Her story, unlike that of an emperor, fades into the forgotten hum of daily life. It's like trying to count all the raindrops in a thunderstorm. You know there are millions, but each one is too small and too fleeting to record individually. These unseen victims represent the vast, silent majority of those affected by unregulated patent medicines. They lack the social prominence to have their ailments or deaths documented in medical journals or sensationalized in the press. Their families, often poor and uneducated, wouldn't have the resources or the knowledge to demand investigations or connect a vague illness to a beauty product. The very secrecy surrounding the use of arsenic wafers, due to shame or perceived impropriety, also meant that many sufferers would hide their symptoms, even from their own doctors, making accurate diagnosis and record-keeping impossible. Historians still argue whether the perceived low number of documented deaths directly attributed to arsenic beauty products reflects the actual rarity of fatal outcomes, or simply the pervasive difficulty in diagnosing chronic, slow-acting poisonings. You can almost feel the quiet despair in these unrecorded lives. A woman suffering from excruciating nerve pain, dismissed by her physician as nervousness. A young man, perhaps also dabbling in these wafers for a fairer complexion, developing mysterious skin lesions and liver problems, attributed to bad blood. Their suffering was real, their deaths tragic, but they lacked the visibility to become part of the historical narrative. Their bodies were quietly laid to rest, their stories buried with them, testament to a system that failed to protect them. The collective weight of these unseen victims is immense. They underscore the true scale of the public health crisis posed by the unregulated pharmaceutical and beauty industries of the 19th century. They serve as a chilling reminder that behind every well-documented historical tragedy, there are countless individual stories of quiet suffering and premature death that never made it into the headlines or history books. Their legacy is the silent, pervasive suffering that occurred when the pursuit of beauty crossed the line into self-inflicted poisoning, leaving only echoes in the statistical void. You're still reflecting on the legacy of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you do, you grasp a timeless truth: the legacy of beauty's cost. This bizarre and tragic episode in history is a stark, unsettling reminder of society's enduring, often dangerous, obsession with appearance and the extreme lengths individuals will go to conform to ever-shifting ideals, often at immense personal peril. Imagine a mirror, reflecting not just the faces of Victorian women, but centuries of human endeavor and suffering in the name of beauty. From ancient Egyptians using lead-based cosmetics to Elizabethan ladies applying poisonous ceruse to whiten their faces, the pattern is eerily consistent. The arsenic wafer fad is just one particularly potent example of this long, often dark history. It reminds you that the desire to be beautiful, to be accepted, or to achieve a certain social standing can override common sense, scientific warnings, and even the instinct for self-preservation. It's like being offered a magic lamp, but every wish you make drains a year off your life. You'd probably still wish for something dazzling, wouldn't you? This cost isn't just about physical health or life itself. It's also about the psychological toll. The constant pressure to achieve an idealized look, the relentless comparison to unattainable standards, And the shame associated with perceived imperfections can create deep-seated insecurities. The arsenic wafer, in this context, wasn't just a physical poison, it was a psychological poison, feeding into these insecurities and offering a false promise of liberation through conformity. Historians still argue whether the extreme beauty standards of the Victorian era were a uniquely oppressive force or merely a continuation of historical trends in aesthetic pressure. You see how beauty, throughout history, has been commodified and weaponized. Advertising, then as now, skillfully preys on these insecurities, promising quick fixes and miraculous transformations. The arsenic wafer advertisements, with their false promises, are direct ancestors of countless modern marketing campaigns that push dangerous diets, invasive procedures, or unproven supplements, all designed to capitalize on the eternal human desire for enhancement. The packaging changes, the specific poisons evolve, but the underlying dynamic of selling hope and sometimes harm for profit remains chillingly similar. The legacy of beauty's cost also compels you to consider the role of societal gatekeepers, fashion arbiters, media, and even medical professionals who, wittingly or unwittingly, perpetuate harmful ideals or fail to adequately warn the public. The arsenic wafer story is a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of blind obedience to trends and the critical importance of questioning authority, particularly when it comes to personal health. It reminds us that everyone is doing it is rarely a good reason to ingest a known poison or to pursue any beauty trend without critical thought. So, as you reflect on the bizarre beauty fad of arsenic wafers, remember its profound legacy of beauty's cost, and it stands as a timeless monument to the often unseen suffering endured in the pursuit of an ideal. A somber reminder that the allure of superficial perfection can sometimes lead to the most profound and irreversible of damages. The human desire to be beautiful is powerful, but this story warns us that it can also be fatally destructive. You're still contemplating the historical echoes of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you do, you can't help but notice striking parallels to modern beauty's shadows. While we no longer ingest arsenic for a pale complexion, thank goodness, the underlying pressures, the quick fix mentality, the deceptive marketing, and the very real health risks associated with pursuing certain beauty ideals are frighteningly persistent in contemporary society. Imagine scrolling through social media today. You're bombarded with images of seemingly flawless individuals, achieved through filters, cosmetic procedures, and often highly restrictive or dangerous practices. Just as Victorian women aspired to a ghostly pallor, today's ideals might include extreme thinness, unnaturally plumped lips, or perfectly sculpted features achieved through invasive surgeries or injectables. The desperate women's quest has simply updated its methods, but the underlying drive for conformity and acceptance remains as powerful as ever. It's like switching from a horse-drawn carriage to a self-driving car, but both are still heading towards a potentially dangerous cliff. The technology changes, but the destination might not. Consider the pervasive influence of social media influencers and brand ambassadors. They are the modern-day quack doctors, often promoting unproven supplements, extreme diets, or questionable cosmetic procedures with glowing testimonials. Much like the deceptive advertisements of the 19th century, the lack of transparent regulation around sponsored content and the rapid dissemination of information and misinformation through digital platforms create a new kind of pharmaceutical shift, where dangerous trends can go viral before proper scientific scrutiny can catch up. Historians still argue whether the speed of information dissemination in the digital age makes modern beauty fads inherently more dangerous than their historical counterparts, or if the increased access to scientific information acts as a stronger counterbalance. You see countless products marketed with vague promises of detoxification, cellular regeneration, or youth restoration, often using pseudoscientific jargon that mirrors the blood purifiers and tonics of the Victorian era. While these might not contain arsenic, some can still pose serious risks, from severe allergic reactions to organ damage. if unregulated or misused. The consumer, once again, is often left to decipher complex claims and distinguish genuine science from clever marketing, just as they were with arsenic wafers. The psychological toll remains immense. The constant bombardment of idealized images and the pressure to conform can lead to body dysmorphia, eating disorders, and a relentless cycle of self-improvement that often involves significant financial and health costs. This is the enduring shadow of beauty's cost, carried forward from the arsenic wafer era into our seemingly enlightened times. It reminds us that humanity's pursuit of an aesthetic ideal, when driven by insecurity and exploited by profit, can still lead to self-harm, even if the poisons are now less overt. So, as you reflect on the historical tragedy of arsenic wafers, allow yourself to see the unsettling echoes in modern beauty's shadows. The lessons from the past are not confined to dusty history books. They are relevant warnings for today, urging us to be critical consumers, to prioritize health over fleeting trends, and to question the allure of any quick fix that promises perfection at too high a price. You're still contemplating the profound impact of the arsenic wafer fad, and as you do, you delve into one of the most fundamental forces that drove individuals to such desperate measures: the power of despair. This wasn't a choice born of casual vanity, but often a deeply personal, almost existential struggle against the harsh realities of Victorian society and the crushing weight of its unforgiving beauty standards. Imagine a woman, perhaps facing financial insecurity, where a good marriage could mean the difference between comfort and destitution, or an unmarried woman, aging, feeling increasingly invisible in a society that valued youth and beauty above all else. Her hope of securing a future, of gaining acceptance, or even just feeling good about herself, might be dwindling. When conventional paths seem closed and life feels overwhelmingly bleak, the promise of a miracle beauty cure, however dangerous, can become an intoxicating beacon of hope. It's like being adrift at sea and someone offers you a life raft that you suspect has a slow leak. But it's the only life raft. You'd probably jump on it, wouldn't you? This despair could stem from various sources. It could be a profound dissatisfaction with one's own appearance, magnified by societal pressures and relentless comparisons to idealized images in popular media. It could be the loneliness of social isolation, where a perceived physical flaw acts as an insurmountable barrier to connection. Or it could be the crushing weight of knowing that one's opportunities, be it marriage, social advancement, or even just respect, are inextricably linked to a fleeting and often unattainable aesthetic ideal. Historians still argue whether the medical and psychological understanding of despair and its role in dangerous self-medication was adequately recognized by Victorian society, or if such behaviors were simply dismissed as irrational vanity. You see the woman, in the quiet solitude of her room, perhaps after a humiliating social encounter or a day spent feeling inadequate. She looks at herself in the mirror, and what she sees fills her with a deep sense of inadequacy. The arsenic wafer becomes a tangible act of hope, a desperate attempt to seize control over her destiny, to transform herself into someone worthy of acceptance and happiness. It's a tragic testament to the human need for belonging and validation, pushed to its most perilous extreme. The power of despair could blind individuals to clear warnings, override logical reasoning, and compel them to embrace methods that were fundamentally self-destructive. When the emotional stakes are so incredibly high, the rational assessment of risk can become completely distorted. The arsenic wafer wasn't just a physical poison, it was a symptom of a deeper societal affliction, revealing the profound vulnerability of individuals trapped within a rigid system that offered few pathways to empowerment beyond outward appearance. It is a chilling reminder of how profound unhappiness can lead to desperate and often fatal decisions. You're still looking back at the bizarre arsenic wafer fad, and as you do, you witness the slow but steady triumph of reason and observation over dangerous deception. Unmasking deception. For decades, these toxic beauty products flourished in an unregulated market. Their false promises, sustained by clever marketing and a lack of scientific accountability. But eventually, among the persistent efforts of dedicated individuals, coupled with advances in scientific understanding, began to expose the dangerous truth. Imagine a determined chemist in a rudimentary laboratory, perhaps in the late 19th or early 20th century. He's not just mixing potions. He's conducting meticulous analyses of various patent medicines, testing them for their actual ingredients. He uses the newly developed Marsh test or similar chemical procedures, which could detect even trace amounts of arsenic in substances. His findings are shocking. These harmless complexion wafers are, in fact, loaded with poison. This wasn't guesswork. This was scientific proof, cold and undeniable. It's like being a detective, finally getting your hands on the smoking gun. After years of whispers and misdirection, the evidence is irrefutable, and the truth is grim. This scientific advancement was crucial. While physicians could observe symptoms, and journalists could report on anecdotal tragedies, concrete chemical analysis provided the irrefutable evidence needed to definitively link the products to the poison. This allowed for stronger, more evidence-based warnings, making it increasingly difficult for manufacturers to continue their deceptive practices. The age of unbridled quackery was slowly, grudgingly, coming to an end. Historians still argue whether the development of specific analytical tests for poisons was primarily driven by academic curiosity or by the urgent public health crisis posed by patent medicines. You see the tireless work of public health advocates, leveraging these scientific findings to lobby for legislative reform. They presented the evidence, the case studies, and the undeniable chemical proof to lawmakers, arguing for stringent regulations, mandatory ingredient labeling, and penalties for false advertising. This was a long, arduous battle against powerful industrial lobbies, but the mounting evidence of harm, unmasked by science, eventually became impossible to ignore. The passage of acts like the Pure Food and Drug Act in the United States in 1906 and similar legislation in other countries marked a significant turning point, finally bringing some measure of accountability to the pharmaceutical and cosmetic industries. The unmasking deception wasn't a single event, but a gradual process of scientific discovery, public education, and political will. It was the triumph of factual evidence over persuasive rhetoric, of long-term health consequences over fleeting aesthetic promises. The victims of arsenic wafers, though many remained unseen, contributed in their suffering to this crucial shift. Their tragic fates served as the impetus for a societal reckoning, ultimately leading to a world where, thankfully, you no longer have to worry about consuming poison to achieve a radiant complexion. The truth, in this case, sets society free, albeit at a terrible cost. You've traveled through a perplexing and unsettling chapter of history, exploring the bizarre beauty fad of arsenic wafers. As our journey concludes with these lessons from a fatal fad, you're left with a profound understanding of how easily human vulnerability, societal pressure, and commercial greed can intertwine with devastating consequences, offering timeless wisdom that resonates even today. Consider one last time the Victorian woman, desperately seeking an idealized beauty. Her story is a poignant testament to the enduring allure of quick fixes, the seductive promise of effortless transformation. It reminds us that humanity's desire for beauty, for acceptance, and for perceived perfection is incredibly powerful, sometimes overriding even the most basic instinct for self-preservation. This fad wasn't just about a specific poison. It was about the dangerous human tendency to believe in shortcuts, especially when those shortcuts promise to alleviate deep-seated insecurities. It's like being told you can instantly become a concert pianist by simply eating a special kind of cookie. Sounds tempting, doesn't it? Even if your logical brain screams otherwise. The tragedy of arsenic wafers also serves as a stark warning about the critical importance of caution and skepticism, particularly when confronted with claims that seem too good to be true. In an era before scientific literacy was widespread, and before stringent consumer protections existed, Individuals were dangerously susceptible to unchecked advertising and the persuasive rhetoric of unscrupulous peddlers. This historical episode underscores the timeless lesson: always question, always scrutinize, especially when it comes to products that affect your health or well-being. You might reflect on the profound ethical responsibility of those who produce and market goods, especially those intended for human consumption or application. The arsenic wafer fad is a chilling reminder of what happens when profit is prioritized above public safety. When the pursuit of wealth trumps all moral considerations, it highlights the absolute necessity of robust regulation, transparent labeling, and independent scientific oversight to protect consumers from hidden dangers. The battles fought and won for public health in the wake of such fads continue to shape the safeguards you rely on every day. Our journey through this strange historical cul-de-sac has shown how a specific beauty ideal could drive people to ingest poison, how a lack of regulation enabled widespread harm, and how the relentless pursuit of perfection could lead to devastating, often unseen, suffering. It's a somber mirror reflecting the darker side of human aspirations, a powerful narrative about the perils of deception and the enduring importance of critical thought. The arsenic wafer fad, though seemingly an anomaly, reveals fundamental truths about human nature and society that remain relevant, urging us to learn from its fatal lessons. Now, as the echoes of Victorian anxieties begin to recede, allow your mind to drift away from these disturbing historical details. The era of arsenic wafers is long past, its dark allure replaced by modern safeguards and a deeper understanding of true well-being. Let the images of sickly complexions and painful suffering soften, melting into the calm of the night. You are safe, nestled in your own time, far from the dangerous fads of yesteryear. Rest easy, knowing that these cautionary tales are confined to the history books, their lessons absorbed, their dangers averted. Allow the gentle hum of the fan, if you have one, to lull you, and let your thoughts drift towards peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams.